20 years ago, a 5-volume report from the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples set out a 20-year agenda to reforge the relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in Canada. Just last year, a campaigning Justin Trudeau felt the need to promise renewal and change in that relationship. Joining us now to consider the road traveled and the road ahead, in Victoria, British Columbia, Judith Sayers, Assistant Professor of Law and Business at the University of Victoria. She's a former chief of the Hapaksas First Nation. In Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Ken Coates, Canada Research Chair at the University of Saskatchewan and co-author of From Treaty Peoples to Treaty Nation. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, Viola Robinson, lead negotiator for the Mi'kmaq Rights Initiative and a former commissioner for the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. Here in studio, Pam Palmater, Chair in Indigenous Governance at Ryerson University, and Catherine Hensel, a lawyer serving First Nations and Indigenous people and organizations across Canada. And we are delighted to welcome everybody to our program tonight for what I think is a very important conversation and timely. Here's a little stat pack just to set the table for our discussion. The full 5-volume Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples report was released November 21st, 1996. 4 Aboriginal and 3 non-Aboriginal commissioners were appointed to investigate and report on one overriding question: what are the foundations of a fair and honorable relationship between the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people of Canada? They visited 96 communities. They had 178 days of public hearings. 350 research studies were commissioned. It set out a 20-year agenda for change, and the final 4,000-page report made more than 400 recommendations, quote, to help restore justice to the relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in Canada. Let us start with Viola Robinson, because you were one of the commissioners, and I want to know, Viola, way back when, how hopeful were you that the report would have the kind of impact that you thought it might have?
Initially, when we started out, I wasn't quite sure, but with the intensive work that went on and the traveling and the visits that we made to communities and listening to communities and and the mandate was so huge, we listened to all the problems that communities were facing. And with the research that was done, the most extensive research ever done, I think, in history on Aboriginal people, we were able to work and review everything and make some, I thought, profound recommendations and set out a plan for the 20 years that we thought that would lead to a better life and way and healing for our people in the country.
And 20 years down the road, let me ask you, how satisfied are you with the rate at which the recommendations have been implemented?
Well, I'm quite satisfied. I think that the most important recommendation, of course, was the one dealing with residential schools, because that was the topic that was front and center to each community that we visited. It seems its impact touched all communities across the country. So there was nothing that we could do to recommend reconcile that whole issue in our report. So the recommendation, one of the first, was to set up the public inquiry, which happened, and also a healing foundation came out of that, and of course apology, and this is what the people were asking for. So I think the government served itself well with the work that and how that recommendation was implemented, and I feel quite satisfied with that.
Let me get some feedback from the others on their views on this. Catherine, how about you? The 20 years since, how satisfied are you with what's happened since?
I'm not, unfortunately, as satisfied as Viola. The work that was done by the Commission and outlined in its recommendations, it was an ambitious agenda and set of recommendations. Unfortunately, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came about as a result of the settlement of litigation. The Government of Canada has not stepped forward and done. The courts have done a great deal. They've relied heavily on the very sophisticated and detailed information in the Royal Commission's work. Some other public inquiries, including IPRWASH, have relied heavily on it. The federal government has has failed to internalize the values and the specifics reflected in the recommendations.
When you say the federal government, is that a reference to even the current government or just the previous Harper government?
Well, certainly the Conservative government under Stephen Harper, that was a very dark time. It was a regressive time in the experience of a lot of our people and communities. And in terms of the relationship, the nation-to-nation relationship, there is hope now over the last year with the messaging from the Liberal government, the new government. We have yet to see, though, actual performance and things other than the calling for the calling and convening the commission into missing and murdered Indigenous women.
More on that as we go through our discussion today. Judith Sayers, how about you? In the 20 years since, how pleased or not are you with what's transpired so far?
Well, I had to blow the dust off my Royal Commission and try and remember what was there, but I really don't think much has been accomplished in the 20 years. Here in British Columbia, of course, the land question, well, it's not a question to First Nations people, has never been resolved. And even 20 years ago, the Royal Commission said that this is urgent, we need to address this. And Aboriginal title still hasn't been resolved. The government is still relying on extinguishment. Their comprehensive claims policy still relies on extinguishment. The courts in Chilcotin talked about how they got the land by the assertion of title, which there's really no such thing. They just took the lands from us. That there was supposed to be interim measures to protect lands and resources for people in British Columbia, First Nations in British Columbia. That's never happened. You know, Crown land resources are rapidly gone from our territories. And so I don't think that much has happened in that regard.
Pam Palmater, 20 years. Do you think nothing good has happened in those 20 years?
20 years and nothing. These commissioners did incredible work. First Nations had a whole lot of hope, but successive federal and provincial and territorial governments, Conservative, MDP, Liberal, you name it, have all failed First Nations. I mean, Catherine's right when she says that the only reason why the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came about was because of litigation. They were forced to do it, just like their apology. We're now in a scenario where we have a government who has different words, but is continuing to break all of their promises. I mean, literally, we have a government 20 years after RCAP saying, hey, let's talk about a nation-to-nation relationship and let's see how to define it. Well, that was the whole purpose of the RCAP report, what nation-to-nation could look like and how different forms of self-determination and self-government might look. And they're only taking their first steps again. So they have literally done nothing. And I don't expect anything from this government in the way of implementing it either.
We should just say RCAP, Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples.
Yes.
That's the acronym.
Yeah.
Are you really prepared to throw in the towel on the Trudeau government 1 year into their mandate?
Unless they do something to show that they have a good faith to fulfill all of their promises, they've broken every single one of them so far, including the murdered and missing Indigenous women inquiry. It's still not operational. The provinces and territories still don't have all their orders and councils. We're in a stasis right now. Ken,
what's your view on this?
Well, I'm very saddened by the last 20 years. I think Viola's observations are really to the point that the Royal Commission did a marvelous job. It was one of the first ones to really talk about the issues of urban Aboriginal folks, of Aboriginal youth across the country, northern issues. Did a wonderful job. And basically the country, the governments at all levels have fumbled that ball terribly. We've never internalized it. One of the speakers said that. All the major significant changes that have occurred in the last 20 years have come because of Aboriginal assistance, whether that's through the court system, and that's been a hugely transformative process across the country, whether it's through Idle No More and a whole bunch of Aboriginal folks just basically speaking up more loudly than they ever have and being heard in ways because of their comprehensive organization. First Nations, Inuit, Métis people have earned the benefits that have occurred in the last little while, but they have been so small. You know, we're still dealing with so many of the challenges, and every day we get more evidence of the fact that we haven't repaired the relationship, we haven't changed our thinking, we haven't changed the fundamental way in which we govern. That report gave us a roadmap. It was a complicated roadmap. It was 400 recommendations. Royal Commissions do best if they only have a couple. But nonetheless, it was a strategy that actually might have seen some effective change across the country. Sadly, it hasn't occurred.
Let's play a clip here. This is one of the other commissioners who was part of RCAP, as it's called. This is Paul Chartrand. speaking this past summer at Carleton University in Ottawa, discussing one of the reasons why he thinks, in his words, very little has been done to implement the recommendations. Sheldon, roll the clip, please.
The reasons I think one of them was very important is the inherent conservatism of people. People fear the unknown. People fear change. Look around at your families and your neighbors and the people that you know. How many people do all kinds of wild, daring things? People are basically conservative and fear the unknown and don't take chances and don't take risks. And that's both sides. Indigenous people themselves are very conservative and I think it's fair to say, better the devil we know than the devil we don't know.
Viola, I think I should give you the first chance to comment on what your fellow commissioner had to say, that it's a fear of change, a fear of the unknown, a fear of taking risks that has prevented progress. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's probably true, that the public itself is always fearful of change, and particularly when you're talking about Aboriginal rights, Aboriginal treaty rights. And I think with any progress that's to be made, it all depends where you are in the country. Now, I have to say that myself, because I'm in Nova Scotia, we've made a lot of progress in the last 20 years, and because I am a former commissioner, I use the report continuously in my work as a lead negotiator, and I feel that we have really made a lot of progress here, and with the dealing as well with provincial government. I don't think it's all federal government. I think all governments have a duty to work with Aboriginal people in this province particularly. Everything we deal with is provincial jurisdiction. So I think you need to be working collaboratively as well with provincial governments as well as with federal government. Now that's a situation for me here, and it's working positively and we're making good progress. Now I understand that in other parts of the country where there are huge numbers of Aboriginal people and you have lots of different nations, sometimes it's difficult to bring everybody together and have everybody working together.
I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your comments, but as people look to the nation-to-nation relationship, that suggests that the federal government has the main role to play. And I want to follow up on Pamela's comments from earlier, where Catherine, she says not a heck of a lot has happened so far with the new Trudeau government. And let's just remind people the language that Justin Trudeau used when he campaigned a year ago, saying he wanted to renew the relationship between Canada and Indigenous peoples. And to that end, the 2016 federal budget committed $8.4 billion over 5 years to bring about what they called transformational change for Canada's Indigenous peoples. Are you as sour on the Trudeau government's performance so far as Pam clearly is? It's okay to use that word, isn't it?
Totally.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm probably a little angrier and sadder, although I assume Pam is as well. We haven't seen the rollout on the ground. Keep in mind there's an enormous apparatus in place called the Department of Indigenous Affairs right now. It changes quite regularly, the name. And that wicks off virtually all the resources that are supposed to be dedicated to delivering all government services within our communities and across the country. That bureaucracy is heavily entrenched, self-invested, and that's where the money stops. The buck stops there, with little or no accountability to communities. The accountability all flows back to the mothership, to Canada, and so that precludes nation-to-nation dealings. The other issue is nations make their own laws. They govern themselves. They have inherent jurisdiction to do that based on territoriality, and they have the authority to govern people within their own territory. We, Indigenous communities, that is not recognized by any other level of government, and that, in my view, is one of the biggest barriers to nation dealing.
Ken, what's your view on Trudeau government at one on this file?
I wish that they'd all read the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples report before they got into government. They made a series of very bold statements that sounded really great. First Nations people, Inuit, Métis people across the country were empowered by the things that were being said. And then they discovered something really important, that actually governance on Indigenous issues is very, very complicated. And there's a whole bunch of levels, a whole bunch of issues. It's very fast moving and whatever. I don't doubt their sincerity. I think they actually really do want to do a good thing. I don't think they have a sense yet of what to do in what order. And so I find it very, very frustrating, because we're now a year in and we actually haven't seen a change in sort of approach or a change in sort of fundamental policy making. We've seen lots of assurances and just wait for us, we're getting to it. Monetary promises that are going to come multiple years down the line rather than coming right now. So from an Aboriginal point of view, I'm not an Aboriginal person, but boy, it must be disappointing. You think you finally got a government that really understands, and in fact what happens is it's clear they don't understand, and they haven't really thought through at a very basic level how to change the Department of Indigenous Affairs, how to change that relationship, and how to actually govern as though Indigenous peoples are full partners in Confederation. We're not there yet, and I wish that we had used this year to actually sort of prove that we at least had started on the right path. I think the path is still a couple of steps ahead.
Pam, before I ask you to follow up on that, because I see you champing at the bit to get in, we do have to say, in the interest of full disclosure, the minister responsible for this is Carolyn Bennett. She is married to the chair of the board of TVO, Peter O'Brien, so we put that on the table in the interest of full disclosure. I've heard Minister Bennett say that this hasn't, for example, the missing and murdered Aboriginal women, Indigenous women inquiry, hasn't happened as quickly as everybody maybe wanted it to, because she has felt intense pressure to consult widely and make sure that it's done properly. And if they'd taken any shortcuts, she'd have been criticized for that. Thus, it's taken as long as it has. You not accept that explanation?
No, I'm so tired of the excuses. Lack of information, it's too complex. We have to talk to people. All of the solutions have been presented for decades. We know what the problems are. Since RCAP, all the statistical surveys have shown that in the last 20 years, all socioeconomic conditions have gotten worse. There's simply no excuse. When you make a very specific promise like, we're going to add $200 million to post-secondary education right now so that we can get these kids into university, and then you don't do it, that's not complexity or oops, I didn't know how the government worked. Many of them are very seasoned bureaucrats. And then you have a scenario where, aside from the fact that the majority of the money goes to the actual bureaucrats who have no excuse for not doing their jobs, the federal government sent back almost $1 billion of unused money last year. Yet, we all seem to be okay with accepting that our kids are going murdered and missing, they're committing suicide, they don't have enough to eat, there's not any housing, clean drinking water.
In fairness, no one's okay with that.
Then why aren't we acting? Because we all know. I mean, people can refer to RCAP. Why aren't we acting? And you know, people say, well, maybe we're conservative. We're not conservative. There's an inherent racism going on here where no one would accept if 10% of the city of Toronto's kids were committing suicide, we would have the army in here doing something. But we don't do that for First Nations, and we all own that.
Judith, how about you? What's your view on how well the Trudeau government has done in its 1 year in power?
Well, I don't think they've done well at all. There was such anticipation, so many promises of what the government was going to do. It was almost like we're going to move into a new world and, you know, a new transformative change, and that hasn't happened, which is really unfortunate. You know, one of the main things that he promised was to allow no to mean no in mega developments in our territories. And of course, in BC, we've got Site C, Kinder Morgan, Pacific Northwest LNG, and you know, now that he's Prime Minister, no doesn't mean no anymore. You know, and so for us, I mean, that's just the bottom dropping out of the world, you know, in our territories. The $8.4 billion is great, you know, but it's for specific programs, housing, water, etc. Our core budgets that we get every year from INAC haven't changed. So we're still operating on the same services, the same budgets, what I always like to call pittance management. Those haven't changed. And so I see so many things, you know, it's almost like the politics of delusion. Like, you know, he's there doing his selfies, he's walking in marches, and he's doing all of these great things to go visit Indigenous communities. But what is the actual action? We keep waiting for those actions. We keep waiting for those changes. And yeah, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Inquiry is great. It's another good thing that's gone forward. But there is so much more out there that we have to do in the way of education. He gave lots of money to students for research. He didn't earmark any for Indigenous students. There's just so many things that could be done really easily and really quickly that aren't being done. And I think that's why there's so much disappointment in Trudeau, in the Justice Minister, the Attorney General, who is First Nations, and we all thought would be able to make all these changes. But, you know, she's under the mandate of the Prime Minister. Very, very unfortunate. And I just don't, you know, until we actually see some action, I just don't believe them anymore. I just don't think things are going to change the way he promised that they would.
Already? Really, Catherine? Already?
Already.
It's been a year. A year is not it's not a brief moment in time. A year in the life of a child who's in foster care and can't see their family and is being raised in a foreign, culturally foreign and environment away from their people. That could be their entire life.
No, I hear you, but they say it takes a year to find the bathrooms on Parliament Hill.
Yeah.
You know,
To be fair, it is going to need intergenerational, multi-generational change. It will take generations to undo the travesties and the acute harm that we have suffered, you know, at the individual, family, community, and national level. But as long as the harm is ongoing, we haven't even begun. And it is safe to say, based on my experience within my community, within my family, with my clients, and talking to the leaders and experts that I talk to, the harm is ongoing. So there's easy ways to stop discriminatory underfunding across the board. We know it's discriminatory. We know it's that Indigenous people do not have access to anywhere near the same level of government services as non-Indigenous people. Fix that. Fix it. Don't fight it. It's easy.
well, let me follow up with Ken on that. Ken, your book is called From Treaty Peoples to Treaty Nation, a roadmap for all Canadians. So let's spend a little time here on that roadmap and figure out how we can get from point A to point B on this. Give us an example of something that you think could be done immediately to ameliorate the situation.
Well, actually, I think we have to change the way we make decisions in Ottawa. And I think the whole process of policy making has to become a question of co-production of policy. The idea that Indigenous people sort of sit on the outside lobbying ideas and lobbying suggestions and lobbying generally into the government asking for changes, and then the doors close and the government gets around by the table by themselves and decide, okay, this year we'll do this and this year we'll do that, but we're not going to fund this, we're not going to fund that. I think we need a radical transformation in how we actually govern this country. That on Indigenous affairs and more generally on a whole bunch of other issues, the government of Canada needs to make Indigenous organizations and Indigenous peoples full partners in those conversations. That they have to make the policy together, make the funding decisions together, set the priorities together, rather than doing this in this sort of closed door kind of atmosphere. To my mind, that's the kind of thing that Indigenous people need to see, at least from my point of view, to know that the system is going to change and has changed. And until you get there, we're talking about small funding decisions and small policy increments. We need to change the way we govern Canada.
Viola, how about you? That roadmap, getting from A to B, what would you put on that map?
I agree with him, with Ken, that yes, you do have to be a part of the change. You have to be a part, engaged in the whole decision making, and be engaged with all the decision makers. And that's the one thing that I've been pushing for here, and this is what we do. We become partners with government people and with officials, and working together, and it's really going a long way. But until that happens, you're sitting on the sidelines watching other people make these decisions for you. And it's important to involve Aboriginal people in places where it will make a difference.
No, that's fair enough, but Pamela, when you look at the situation between the Prime Minister and only 10 premiers and 3 territorial leaders, and we know how fractious those discussions can get, there are more than 600 First Nations in this country. Mm-hmm. How is a government of Canada supposed to, in an effective and an efficient way, move the ball down the field with more than 600 different First Nations?
Well, how does the United Nations do it? But they
Not
see,
very well.
But they do it on certain core issues. And you've got Canada who's saying, you know, nation to nation. We've been saying that forever. And our nations aren't 633 First Nations. They need to take the time to ask, how do you want us to deal with you? The Mi'kmaq might say, well, we want to do it as a Mi'kmaq nation, which involves 4 provinces and territories. Whereas other people might want to do it by treaty territory. Other people might want to do it by certain amalgamations under tribal councils. But that's up to us, and no one has asked us.
That conversation has not been had.
That conversation hasn't been had, and we're getting caught up in the bigger things, you know, policy development and law development, when in actual fact we have a crisis, a humanitarian crisis before us that's as big as any that you can see in any other country in the world. We need, first and foremost, starting today, an emergency management team of federal, provincial, territorial, First Nation governments to come together and say, okay, what do we do right now to get water to people, to get food to people, like you would do in any war-torn country, except we're not a war-torn country. And then you can have multilateral processes to deal with the lands, return of lands and resources, to deal with the division of powers inside or outside the Constitution, lawmaking, and all of those things that, yes, take time and yes, are complex. But there's never been an excuse for not dealing with this social crisis, the humanitarian crisis that exists right now in most of our communities.
Judith, that sounds like a roadmap. What's preventing that roadmap from happening?
I think we need to shed ourselves of the cloak of colonialism. We need to get past paternalism. We need to get past the fear of delegating authority. We need to get past that fear that First Nations, or that feeling that First Nations can't do it ourselves. And we can. We need to be able to open our minds and our hearts and start looking at innovative solutions. How can we do this? You know, we failed under federal and provincial laws. You know, we can start again and we can do things. And we need to have that kind of a relationship where we can sit at the table equally and come up with the solutions that are going to forge our future. Because without that kind of attitude, we're going to be still stuck in the past. And, you know, I mean, we look from Trudeau to Trudeau. Has there been changes? You know, we haven't seen any. And you know, this government may say good things, but let's act on them. Let's work with First Nations. Let's do that and really change the landscape of how things have been done in the past. With Harper, everything was imposed on us. You know, we know what's good for you and we're going to do it for you. And we still hear that. We know that this economic development is good for you, but it's not good for our way of life. So let's have those honest conversations and dialogue and find ways that we can work together for the benefit of, you know, everybody.
Jonathan Kay was recently on this program. He's the editor of the Walrus magazine, and we talked about the Indian Act when he was on. And let's play a little snippet of what he had to say on that occasion. Roll it, please, Sheldon.
The biggest aspect of the Indian Act is that we deny natives who live on reserves the right to own their own land in the way that you or I might own our own homes. Ultimately, at the end of the day, a person living in a house, they might be able to own the house, they can't own the land under it. And this is a huge problem because the main way that people in Canada and all capitalist countries develop wealth is by owning property. And it's the one systematic right that we deny people on reserves. The problem here is there's another contradiction, is that the left in Canada kind of romanticizes that aspect of it because it reminds them of sort of Soviet-type land collectives. And I think there's a huge divergence between people who live on reserves, and a lot of them I think would love to own their own property. And yet if you go to the university activist left in Canada, they kind of romanticize and sentimentalize that aspect of the reserve system, which is the most patronizing aspect of the Indian Act.
Okay, Pamela, fire away. What do you think?
It's Tom Flanagan reincarnated. I mean, we're going back to primitive communist kind of, you know, allegations about not owning fee simple on reserve. Fee simple hasn't brought wealth to Canadians. Homelessness is actually on the rise. Simply being able to own a piece of land in Canada is really a myth because the underlying title is in Her Majesty the Queen, and Canada and the provinces have the right to expropriate it and use it and make laws around it. Like, no different than the Indian Act.
So he has no point here?
He has no point. People can get a mortgage for a house on reserve if they want to. They can get bank loans to start businesses on reserve if they want to. The only difference, really, between individual possession of lands on reserve and off reserve is that you cannot sell it to non-Indians. And that's what proponents like them are the most upset about, because they want the last of our land for things like mining and forestry and to finally break up our reserves. It serves no purpose for First Nations.
Ken Coates, we're down to our last few minutes here, and I want to know what's going to get this unstuck. What do you think?
Well, a couple of things. I think we need to sort of recognize the urgency of the situation. Several of the speakers have talked about this. We have a crisis, in particular with children, all across the Indigenous communities in this country. And unless we treat it like a crisis, basically the message to the communities will be that we don't care. And so we better do something very, very dramatic about that. But I guess I'd take my last second to talk about something more general. A few people have mentioned this. Canada is an aggressively racist nation. And I think First Nations people, Métis and Inuit people, live with a reality the rest of Canadians have trouble understanding. And I think until we get to that point, there's something really deep and entrenched about the racism that First Nations and Inuit and Métis people have to deal with. And that's a conversation we prefer to pass off. We say the government hasn't done this and the government hasn't done that. I think, quite frankly, Canadians have not really embraced their collective responsibilities in partnership with Indigenous people. Let's have a very different conversation that sort of holds the mirror up to this country as a whole. It's not a pretty picture at times.
Viola Robinson, I'm going to give you the last word in our last minute here, since you were one of the commissioners on that original RCAP, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. Do you look at Canada as an aggressively racist nation?
Well, I don't know if it's aggressively racist or not, but certainly racism is there. It's always been there, and it's there, and I don't know. It's going to be very difficult to get rid of it completely. But I do want to say one thing about the nation to nation. That term is being thrown around a lot. It's been by federal government and by people, nation to nation to nation. When we recommended that they have to start dealing with us as nations of people, we weren't talking about First Nations, we were talking about nations. We have 600 and some First Nations. It's impossible to set up 600 and some different types of self-governing nations or what have you. That would be too cumbersome. We were talking about nation, like the Mi'kmaq or the Cree or whatever. The number is much less when you're talking about nations of Aboriginal people in Canada. There's not, but the 600 and some nations we talk about, they're First Nations. Those are created by the Indian Act, and they're not the real nations that we were talking about. And certainly I think the other message that we made loud and clear is that listen to the people, listen to them. They have something to say and they know what they're talking about. Take time and listen to them and work with them as people.
I am happy to say that we have been delighted to listen to all of you over the last half hour or more on clearly one of the most pressing issues in our country today. Thanks to Viola Robinson, Judith Sayers, and Ken Coates, who joined us on the line from Halifax, Victoria, and Saskatoon, respectively. Catherine Hensel and Pam Palmater here in our studio in Toronto. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.